He was born in the grey hush of post-war Leningrad, a city that wore its scars like medals. The air carried the smell of stone and smoke, and the stories of those who survived the siege hung over every streetlight. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin arrived in 1952, small, restless, and unseen. One of countless boys growing up in a crumbling empire, where dreams cost more than bread and privacy was just another myth. Even then, something in him preferred the shadows to the spotlight. Perhaps he understood, instinctively, that in Russia, survival often belonged to the invisible. He chased rats in the stairwells of communal buildings, learning early that fear had to be cornered before it cornered you. It's a simple lesson, but one he would never forget. Power isn't given, it's taken quietly, decisively, before anyone else knows it's there to take. He was small for his age, mocked for it, but his stare had the kind of calm that unnerved older boys. That composure would later become a weapon sharper than any blade. By the time he found judo, he'd already found himself, or at least the version of himself he could control. On the mat, he learned balance, patience, the art of using another's momentum against them. In many ways, judo was the perfect metaphor for his politics before he even knew he'd have one. Attack only when you're certain, strike without anger, and always, always let your opponent believe it was their own idea to fall. But the real lure came not from sport, but from the whispering corridors of power. In the 1970s, the Soviet Union was a theatre of secrecy, and for a boy raised on stories of espionage, the KGB looked less like an employer and more like destiny. When he joined, he didn't boast. He studied, observed, blended. He was not the dramatic spy of Western imagination, but a bureaucrat of silence, a man trained to vanish behind his own reflection. His gift was not charisma, but control. In Dresden, East Germany, he worked as a mid-level officer. The wall still stood then, dividing not just a city but an entire worldview. While others sought glory and headlines, he preferred the quiet files, the reports, the delicate machinery of influence. In that world, truth and deception weren't opposites. They were tools, interchangeable depending on who needed what. And he learned that power didn't require armies. Sometimes it only needed the right rumour placed at the right time. When the Soviet Union began to crumble, so did the empire of illusions he had served. In 1989, as the Berlin Wall came down, he found himself in Dresden, burning files to keep secrets from the mob outside. He later said that night taught him what it meant to be abandoned by the state. The Kremlin had gone silent, no orders came. In that moment of chaos he saw the truth, that power without structure was an orphan, and he would never be powerless again. Years later, he'd recall those days with the same steady tone he used for everything. No drama, no regret, just analysis. Perhaps that's what made him so fascinating to the West. A man who seemed immune to emotion, yet whose every action rippled through the emotional core of nations. If curiosity were currency, he'd be a millionaire. So invest a click in the curious. When he returned to Leningrad, now called St. Petersburg, the world had changed. The Soviet red had faded into the grey of transition. Markets opened, fortunes appeared overnight, and morality became negotiable. Putin moved through it quietly, aligning himself with reformists, business people, anyone who could navigate the chaos. His KGB discipline remained intact, but he began to apply it to politics. Information was still the weapon. Only now the targets were economic and ideological. Working under Anatoly Sobchak, the city's liberal mayor, Putin handled foreign relations and money. It was the perfect training ground for modern Russian power, a blend of corruption, idealism, and survival instinct. Some saw him as a loyal aide, others as a calculating climber. Both were right. Beneath the polite exterior was a man cataloguing every lesson in betrayal and ambition. By the late 1990s, Russia was collapsing under its own weight. The Yeltsin years had brought capitalism, but also chaos. Inflation devoured savings, oligarchs carved up the nation's wealth, and the people lost faith in every institution that once anchored them. In that vacuum, Putin's quiet competence began to look like virtue. He wasn't charismatic, but he was reliable, or at least appeared to be. Then came the appointment. Prime Minister, 1999. Few noticed at first. He seemed too bland, too disciplined to matter. but history loves its ironies. When the Second Chechen War erupted, he appeared on television, calm and cold, promising to wipe out terrorists in the outhouse. It was raw, unpolished and effective. The country, humiliated for a decade, found its voice again through his. And so, almost overnight, he became Russia's answer to disorder. The 1990s had been a wound. Putin offered the bandage, and few cared if it was clean. By 2000, he was president. The KGB officer who once burned papers to save a regime now ran one. In those early years, there was a sense of rebirth. Salaries were paid on time, oil money flooded in, and Moscow glittered with new wealth. The chaos of democracy was replaced by the calm of the order, or what looked like it. He spoke of stability, unity, pride, and for a while people believed him. Even those who doubted his motives admired his efficiency. But every empire has its price. As his power solidified, the space for dissent evaporated. Journalists disappeared, opponents found themselves on the wrong side of justice or history. He wasn't brutal for spectacle, he was meticulous, procedural. The cruelty lay in the calmness of it, as though repression were merely housekeeping. The West misread him again and again. They saw a pragmatist, not a believer. But belief was always there. Belief in the restoration of something older than ideology, the Russian idea itself. Not communism, not democracy, but destiny. He spoke of it often, the sacred continuity of the state. To him, leaders were not elected. They were revealed, like veins of ore beneath the soil of history. The more the world watched, the less it understood. Was he the patriot or the autocrat? The guardian or the manipulator? The truth, as always, was a mirror, and he stood behind it. He crafted an image of modernity while reviving imperial reflexes. Each decision, each photo, each televised moment was a lesson in perception. He knew that power today isn't held, it's performed. Then came the years of confrontation. Georgia in 2008, Crimea in 2014, Syria 2015. Each time, the same rhythm. Outrage, sanctions, survival. He understood the West's weakness, its addiction to outrage without endurance. While others moved in news cycles, he moved in decades, and that patience once learned on the judo mat became geopolitical art. But power isolates. The longer he ruled, the smaller his circle became, until even truth had to pass through layers of loyalty before it reached him. In public, he joked, smiled, cultivated the image of a man both feared and oddly amused by it. Yet there were moments, fleeting ones, when his expression betrayed something else. Weariness, perhaps. The kind that comes when you realise the empire you rebuilt may be built only on mirrors, and then the full turn. War returned to Europe. 2022. Ukraine, a nation he once called brother, became enemy. He justified it as destiny, history, protection, but the world saw invasion, death, ruin. Inside Russia, the story remained different. He spoke to the nation as though narrating its myth. The West was decadent, Russia eternal. Truth bent once again under the weight of history. Does morality bend with it? That's the question his life poses, not to him, but to us. When power becomes synonymous with survival, what happens to conscience? Is deception evil, or simply adaptation? For Putin, these were not philosophical questions, they were strategy. Now, decades into his rule, his image has become more symbol than man. Statues, portraits, parodies, all reflections of a leader who understood long ago that perception is stronger than affection. Even his critics play their roles in his theatre, keeping his name alive in the echo chamber of history. And yet, the paradox remains. Beneath the armour of propaganda and power, there's still that boy from Leningrad, learning to corner fear in the dark. The one who watched his city survive starvation and thought, never again. The one who burned documents in Dresden and learned that silence can be louder than any command. His story is not one of redemption in the Western sense. It's a different kind of redemption, measured not in grace, but in endurance. He has become both architect and prisoner of his own design. The moral clarity of the historian dissolves when faced with such a figure. Is he the inevitable product of his time, or the author of it? History will decide. but only after he's done rewriting it himself. Today, as the world watches him age, one truth endures. Power, like gravity, never disappears. It simply changes form. The empire he resurrected stands uneasy, its foundations trembling under sanctions and resistance, yet it still breathes. Because he built it to reflect not the best of Russia, but the most familiar, the hunger for order, for strength, for certainty in a world that rarely offers it. And so the question remains, echoing through marble halls and television screens alike, what will Russia be when he's gone? For some, he is the last guardian of a vanished age. For others, the architect of its new prison. He dreamed of restoring greatness. In doing so, he trapped it inside himself. And perhaps that's the final mirror, that in every leader who builds a myth, the myth eventually consumes the man. He dreamed in empires. We scroll in echoes. History, after all, is just power remembering itself.